Welcome everyone. I'm Dick Calloway. I'm president of the Tryon History Museum. And we appreciate everyone's being here at our Tales of Tryon, latest Tales of Tryon installment. Let me say just a word about the Tales of Tryon. Most of you know this, but a few of you may not. We've done this lecture series for several years now, and we like to concentrate on people, but when you concentrate on people, it inevitably leads to what they were doing, their activities, their ideas, their accomplishments, their contributions to Tryon. So it goes two ways. We find out that some of our tales are three ways really. Some of our tales are about Tryon and Tryon alone, but it's really a little hard to confine it to just that. We often deal with ideas that came to Tryon from somewhere else but became part of Tryon's culture. So we might trace the history of the idea. And these ideas have made Tryon the unique place it is. On the contrary, there are contributions that Tryon people have made that have benefited the community but have also benefited the wider world. So we have an example today of that, of something that is of ideas of people whose ideas and influence have radiated out from Tryon and ideas that have radiated into Tryon through these people. We're going to look today, our speaker is at two Tryon architects, Ligon, Flynn and Holland, Brady, who were both involved with the mid-century modern movement in architecture. A movement, and I'm not going to steal Shield's thunder here, but a movement that occupied a good deal of the 20th century, the middle of it. Its influence is felt still today, and actually is experiencing a renewal of interest in recent years, and that's part of what we're going to be hearing about. So we have two native sons here, and their impact on Tryon and the state of North Carolina, and perhaps even the larger world. You're going to give attention, I take it, Shields, to the Brady booklet, which we have for sale here. You're going to, I would really encourage you to buy a copy of this. Many of you know about the importance of architecture in Tryon's development. Some of you may not. You will know when you read this booklet. It's absolutely astounding, the architectural influence that's been present in this small town. Our speaker today is uniquely qualified to talk about this. He's the brother-in-law of one of the people he's going to be talking about, and the brother of the other. And Shields Flynn's an interesting character in himself. He fits right into Tryon. Shields is a Tryon native. He's a graduate of the University of North Carolina in 1960. Then he spent about 38 years in the computer and software business, I believe largely in New England. And he came home and started a minerals and fossil company. So Shields is not only a software pioneer, a computer pioneer, he was in this game pretty early. He's also an expert geologist, mineralogist, gemologist. He's covered that whole territory, and he's recently, I don't know that he wanted me to get off the subject, but I'm going to for a brief moment. He's recently written a book on unearthing North Carolina mineral treasures, from lithium to gold. I have a copy of that. I think Shields can help you get a copy. I would highly recommend it. But in addition to being a mineralogist and a computer man, he's a musician, and as we'll find out in a minute, he's a student of architecture. Shields has I don't want to swell his head, but he has a quick mind, endless curiosity, a restless imagination, and pays meticulous attention to detail. You're going to see all this come out in the talk. Shields and his lovely wife, Frances, have been fixtures in Tryon for a good many years now, make valuable contributions to the community. If you know Shields, I think you'll agree with everything I said about him. If you don't know him, you'll wonder why you didn't get to know him sooner when you hear this talk. So I'll give you Shields Flynn. Welcome to Tales of Tryon, Shields.
Well, let me begin pollen is getting to my voice today. I'm sure if it's not the pollen, it's the smoke coming down. So bear with me from that point of view. So let me begin by saying thanks to the Tryon Historical Museum for sponsoring this and for organizing it. And without that, we wouldn't have made this possible. So I'm going to take you down some windy roads today. And the challenge I had trying to put this together was dealing with two individuals and a town and trying to put this in some kind of chronological order that would make some sense. So hopefully the end result, I will have accomplished that. So as Dick said, this is the tale of two Tryon architects. Ligon Flynn, my brother, and Holland Brady, Jr., my brother-in-law. And this will be the focus of the talk today, but we're also going to have to take a couple of side roads and talk about a few other things as well along the way. Because this is also a story about architects in a small southern town. And if nothing else, I hope you will all carry away today a greater appreciation of this amazing community that we live in. And together with that, a better understanding of one aspect of it, architecturally speaking, that helps make it a very unusual community and one we should all be proud to live in. And unfortunately, I think the word's getting around because the article in the bulletin yesterday about being one of the top places to retire, I don't know if that's good news or bad news. But anyway, we're going to talk about architects and architecture in a small town. And I also have to talk about mid-century modernist architecture. Dick had wanted me to do a whole talk on this, and I said, there's no way am I qualified to do that. We've got others much better qualified than me. But I said I would be happy to talk about it from the perspective of two architects that I grew up with. So we'll also take a little side road and talk about what mid-century modernist is all about. So before we get going, I want to recognize two previous talks by Dean Tragus on the architecture of Tryon. And for those of you who haven't missed it or want to go back and revisit it, both of those were videoed and are available on the Tryon History Museum website and as well on YouTube. So I would encourage you to, if you're interested in the full architectural period, to go back and look at those. I also want to recognize the photographs that were provided by Chris Bartol, Gary Korn, and Ford Smith, and I will mention those as I go through the talk. Also, Mike McHugh's essays about the architecture, art, and people of Tryon. For those of you who are not familiar with it, I would strongly urge you to make a note and go visit TryonHistory.org, where Mike is the editor. And there you will find some really interesting and fascinating articles on other aspects of Tryon architecture, as well as historical notes and a lot of biographies about interesting people who have lived here. So make a note to be sure to do that if you haven't done that yet. So considering the fact that Ligon and Holland grew up and their architectural period really spanned the heart of the mid-century modernist period. So I felt it was important to just take a few minutes and talk about a few of the characteristics that people write about when they talk about mid-century architecture and the mid-century modern period, because as we'll see, mid-century, it was really a movement, and it was was a worldwide movement. And it incorporated interior design, product design, graphic design, architecture, and it spanned a period from approximately 1945 to the 1970s. So that kind of gives us a window, and as you will see, that is exactly the period when Holland and Ligon were practicing their craft. The next thing you'll notice is that it's often been characterized by the architecture having clean lines, large windows, glass curtains, as some people refer to them, and a lot of natural materials and woods being used. So this is quite a contrast from the architectural period before, that basically a lot of people were still reverting back to European architecture, and then that evolved into the arts and crafts period. And so the mid-century movement was quite distinct in that respect, as you'll see some of the examples as we go through this. Mid-century movement also incorporated furnishings for the house. It was furniture, it was lighting, it was several aspects that really went together to make up the, quote, mid-century movement. And of course we can't overlook the fact that it also included painting. And painting became a very important part. And as you'll see as we get into it, Ligon became really dedicated to devoting a large portion of his career to painting. So we'll go into those things in more depth as we go through the talk. This list, and this could be subject of several courses in a major university. So I just threw these up to give you an idea of who some of the top names were. Corbusier, Wright, Gropius, Van der Rohe. These are names I could add probably 50 more to this list. So those of you who are really interested in pursuing this more can go and to look up and delve deeper into what some of these people did. This is just a photograph to illustrate the basic flat roof, glass curtains, long overhand, natural woods. This is just such a great example of the early 50s mid-century architecture. And as I mentioned, also part of this, we have the people all over the world, whether it was the United States or Europe, designing furniture to go into these new mid-century modernist houses. And I list here just a series of names you may or may not know. And I'll show you a couple of examples. For example, these are the well-known Eames lounge chairs, sitting in a nice modern example. Big windows, natural woods. So these are very classic of that early 50s period that Ray and Charles Eames designed. Here's an example also of their wire chairs that was introduced in 1951. And then another one, this is the Latoya chairs, another wire-based chair, just to give you some examples of some of the furnishings that went along with the architecture of that period. And it wasn't just architecture and furnishings, but also people, Scandinavia, Italian, French, German, they were all designing different types of lighting to go into these environments. So when you start to look at a real mid-century house that incorporates so many of these things, then you really get the full essence of what was happening during that period. Here's an example of lamps and radios. Yes, radios are also very characteristic of that period. Here's another, it's a ceiling lamp, very well known, atomic structure. Another lamp, so you can see people were really very creative in their lighting, that they were having to go in these houses. And this is a picture of our living room. kind of showing some of these things. You see, the painting on the left is by Ligon, Flynn, my brother. The glacier in the middle by a Finnish painter and artist. And then the painting on the right was done by one of Ligon's painting friends at NC State in the early 60s. And then, of course, you see the middle, the Danish design, cadenza, and the furnishings all go together to kind of give you that mid-century feel. We now need to take a few minutes and talk about the importance of the new School of Design that was started at NC State in 1947-48. A gentleman by the name of Henry Campheffner was hired to start this new School of Design. And you have to kind of think, and during that time, there were not really a lot of top schools in the country offering courses in mid-century architecture. Many of the schools had grown up from other roots and depended more on European architecture, and it evolved into this. But the NC State School started from the ground in 1948-49, right from the beginning, to be a school that was going to teach mid-century modern. And that's a school that Ligon landed into, as you'll see, when he started there in 49. But Campheffner went and he hired some of the absolute top architects that he could find in the country. George Matsumoto, Edward Catalano, and Duncan Stewart, for example. Duncan Stewart, you probably have never heard of him. I hadn't until I started learning more about Ligon. But he was a well-respected artist. He had his paintings exhibited in the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum, most of the top museums in the country. And on top of that, he was a brilliant mathematician. And I just give you that as an indication of the caliber of the type of instructors that Campheffner was hiring to stimulate the minds of these new architects that were coming to the school. And Campheffner apparently gave up one of his spots to hire another professor, but instead he said, I'm going to bring in top architects in the country as it is today. And so he brought in people like Mies van der Rohe and Frank Lloyd Wright and Buckminster Fuller. And to illustrate this point, I don't know how many of you see Air State magazine, but the current issue, the March issue, has an article called The Right Stuff. And this tells you all about the new School of Design and what Wright and others were doing to stimulate the minds of these young architects. So if you have access to it, it's the March issue. I think you'll find it to be a very interesting read. And I highlight this is because this is the environment in which my brother Ligon landed in 1949. And the impact, it was just astounding to all of these young architects that were there. So, this takes us up to a point. Now we're going to take a few minutes and look at Holland. Since he's the oldest, born in 1925, I thought I'd start with him. And we'll talk about kind of the early years of Holland and Ligon. And then we'll come back later and we'll go through some of the examples of the houses and the awards and things that they achieved through their careers. So Holland was born, grew up in Tryon. He was a product of Tryon schools, so he was a real native. And he attended Clemson for a short period of time before he went into ended up as a medic and traveled all the way across Europe during that time. And then apparently, I'd always wondered why he ended up going to Michigan rather than going back to Clemson when he got out of the Army. And apparently, he met someone in the Army who told him all about how great the Michigan's School of Architecture was. And so I'm not sure quite how it all happened, but he ended up selecting to go to Michigan to study architecture. And it was because of that, it turns out Michigan had started an architectural course as far as back as 1876. So the Michigan really went back a long way. And it was in, I think, around 1939, they had actually established a full course in architecture at Michigan at that time. So Holland is in Michigan, and you'll see another parallel between Holland and Ligon. And that parallel is both of them, while in school, did a little architectural work on the side. And Bill McCall, who's in the audience, can tell about how Holland helped with his dad design their house, right?
Yep.
While he was still in school.
Yeah, he was still in school, and there had been a foundation built on this lot over the circle in the 20s, and they poured the foundation, this 18-inch concrete foundation, and then the crash came and they stopped. And it sat there for all those years. Dad discovered it and bought the foundation of the property we live on right now. And he called Holland and said, Holland, you gotta design me a house. And he was still in Michigan.
That's right.
So he wasn't even licensed yet. But he did it.
He did it.
He did it, first house. So we live in it now.
And you'll find that when we get to Ligon's part, he was also in school designing houses. So here are these two Tryon boys again, coming back home and doing some designs. So after that, Holland went to work for an architect in Chicago by the name of Paul Schweitzer. And we'll come back and talk about that a little bit later when we pick up where Holland sort of graduates and starts in his first job. But right now, I just wanted to sort of summarize Holland's period in Tryon and through his early educational time. So after Chicago, he ended up coming back and spending a little time with six associates in Asheville with Tony Lord, and then we'll see he ended up marrying my sister in 51, and he joined Meriwether also in 51. So we'll come back and you'll see that 51 turns out to be a very pivotal period in the life. I don't know how many of you have seen this. It was in one of Mike McHugh's books, and this was a portrait done by Josephine Cooper. I think around 1939, because he looks like he was about 14 or 15 at that point. And Cooper, I don't know how many of you know, she lived in the Rock House just above the railroad going up towards the post office in Tryon. So I put this also up to illustrate that Holland was also in the Boy Scouts. And so he was growing up in this little town of Tryon, and you'll see also that later Ligon did the same thing.
Shields, my dad was a scoutmaster. That was the connection.
That was okay. So there were, as Holland says in his little book that Dick talked about, there were several people who were really big influences in his life in Tryon. And some of these were covered in Dean's last talk. So I'm not going to go into great detail, but I just want for those of you who have not seen that and are not aware of who Catherine Tobin Wright was. She was Frank Lloyd Wright's first wife. And they had 6 children. And I guess Frank was quite busy in his architectural works and met some other people, and eventually the marriage failed. And she ended up living in a little house on Melrose Avenue. And Holland remembers how he used to take her books from the living library. Thunder and strike lightning. He used to take her books and would talk to her about Frank Lloyd, about her husband and Frank Lloyd Wright. And he always said that was a very important turning point to help him sort of define where he wanted to go in life. And we'll also talk a little bit later about Russell Walcott and how he fits into this whole period here. So Holland, I want to say, was an architect for a wide variety of structures. You know, he, for over a period of 60 years, he was involved in over 800 projects that included, you know, full house designs to renovations and whatever. That's a lot of projects to be involved in a little town of Tryon. He did houses, he did churches, the environment that you're sitting in today, and one of the reasons we wanted to do this here. He did fire stations. He just did a wide variety of structures. And his designs really had a wide variety of architectural styles, but he kept coming back to the sort of more mid-century modern style, as you'll see in some of his examples that I'm going to show you later. Additionally, Holland had a great love of music. To give you another little facet of his life away from the office, he loved classical music. And when he passed away, we inherited almost 500 classical CD that he had collected over many, many years. But he was also a collector of books, and they weren't just books on architecture, but he loved mystery books. He had designed the house for, I don't know if anybody here knew Lillian Jackson Braun or Bettinger, but he designed her house. And Lillian wrote 23 mystery novels about cats. And Holland devoured them all, and he had, I think, a signed copy by her for every one she ever published. And and she lived here for like 23 years, so.
She also was an expert on Danish modern furniture and co-authored a book on Danish modern furniture. And she gave Holland that wonderful, can't remember the designer, that great wing chair, mid-century modern wing chair.
Oh,
It was
yes.
in the office for years and years.
Right. So I bring up Lillian just to give you an example that ties in with his love for books and music and everything else. So Holland was also, we call him a closet postcard collector, because very few people knew he had this thing about collecting postcards. But when he was in the Army, his collection of postcards started in England and went all the way across Europe, where he was collecting cards of architectural structures. Here's an example of just a few from the sort of German, I don't know, French area, but he had literally thousands of postcards. So this was another side of Holland's life that maybe many people were not aware of, but it helped really kind of define Holland, that he was more than just an architect. He had a lot of other great interests as well. So now let's come back to my brother Ligon. And I wanted to just say that I'm so pleased that his son, Flynn, was here today, came up from Wilmington to join us. And while I'm talking about this, Holland's son, Mark, is here as well. And Caroline Moore Chapman is here because she lived in the house she grew up in the house that was on the starting slide that you saw. So I'm so pleased that they could make it here today. So I had an interesting experience growing up with Ligon because He was born in 31. I was born in 38. So there was like this 8-year gap. Now that's a long time between siblings. And so I had a challenging time trying to figure out what my brother, 8 years ahead of me, was often doing. And I was often asked, why did it take him a decade to get his degree? Because he started at NC State in 49, but he didn't get his degree until 59. So what was going on? Well, it turns out, Ligon completed several of the courses, a couple of 3 years, and he really was getting into the swing of things. He was there when Frank Lloyd Wright was coming and talking, when Mies van der Rohe was there, when Buckminster Fuller, and he was getting all of these ideas about things he wanted to design and to do. So these thoughts were going around his head. And then one of the professors at school got a contract to do a mural in the student union at NC State. Well, it turned out turned out to be a much bigger project than had originally been anticipated, because it covered the whole wall in the student union. Wood was telling me he remembers it there many years ago. I'm not sure if it still is or not. But it totally absorbed Ligon, because he got into doing this thing. And apparently no one had ever done anything like this. And anybody who's interested, I can tell you how to reach a website about this mural that was done at the atrium at NC State. So anyway, he got wrapped up in that, and then along comes the Korean War. And he had been in ROTC, and he was able to go into the Corps of Engineers as a first lieutenant. So he goes off and he spends a couple of years in the engineers, building bridges and that kind of thing. And then somehow, and this is all kind of a mystery to me, somehow in between that, he managed to design and build several houses here in Tryon. So he was a very busy lad, doing a lot of different things. And then he decided he needed to know what they were doing in Europe. So he decided, after he got out of the army, maybe I ought to do some traveling. So he went on a travel thing, and he had a deux chevaux, which you recognize. Some people in the audience have one here. And apparently they rented one, and that's how they toured around Europe. He had a buddy. And so then he comes back, finally. He gets all this out of his system. He comes back to state, finishes his degree, and gets his degree in architecture in 1959. And he was then really got into painting. And there were several artists at NC State in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. One was a fellow by the name of George Berline. And George's works, by the way, are in most of the museums in North Carolina. I know there's one in Asheville and several in other museums in the state. So George was also teaching, and Ligon was working with him in painting. And so time passes when you're having fun, I guess. And the next thing, it turns out, he's now teaching at NC State. So he now becomes a professor and starts teaching courses at State. And I don't know if Will Barron's made it here today. I know he was down with the flu earlier this week. But those of you who know Will, it turns out he took a course from Ligon while Ligon was teaching at NC State, and actually lived in one of the houses that Ligon designed. So Will had a very interesting background from that perspective. So then during this time, Ligon met some other architects, and before long they had an office established, and they were starting to do houses in Raleigh. And then the next thing, he got this opportunity to move to Wilmington, North Carolina, where he eventually started his own practice. So just to recount a little bit, Ligon grew up here. He was an Eagle Scout, and so he's in the Scouts just like Holland. Graduated from Tryon High School like Holland. But he immediately enrolled in the New School of Design at NC State in '49, because it was '49 when they really got going. And during this time, he designed and built several houses in Tryon. And some of those are perhaps better known than others. And those are the houses that were built on what's known as Country Club Heights, and was helped by his brother-in-law. And Caroline Chapman, who's in the audience, grew up on one of those houses. So we'll talk about a little bit more about that later. And then he did another house for my sister Mary and my brother-in-law Tom Moore. And we'll show you pictures of those a little later. As I mentioned, Ligon had other interests in painting as well as photography. You'll see later on he won a very prestigious prize from Camp Hefner, which was a very large amount of money, and he went and bought a Leica camera and built himself a photographic studio, and he really got into photographing architectural works, but he traveled a lot between Tryon and Wilmington, and at that point he would go through areas where that was big tobacco country, and he kept noticing the tobacco barns, and he ended up, as you'll see in a minute, developing a whole program around tobacco barns. But I'll just give you a couple of examples. This painting was done when Ligon was in his first course with Duncan Stewart, who was teaching art at NC State at the time, known as the Vikings. And interestingly enough, this won Painting of the Year in the exhibit that it was in Raleigh. And it turns out my father actually built the frame for this. So only by chance did I happen to acquire it recently, because some of you may know the name George Dusenberry, who lived in Tryon. And George bought this painting from Ligon in the a very early period. I'm not quite sure when he bought it, but he did, so probably in the mid-60s, early 70s. And when he died, it went to his son Philip. And when Philip died, at the estate sale, I was made aware of this and was able to acquire this. So it was a happenstance that we happened to acquire this. This is another example, I think, during the period when he was involved with George Berline. And they were exploring other painting techniques and everything else very much in the period. This is one of the photographs of one of the tobacco barns that he did. This exhibit he did, I think it was called Tobacco Roads or something. It was an exhibit that was traveled from Winston-Salem to Raleigh to Wilmington, I believe. It was in several locations where he would stop and photograph these barns, which he thought these are not going to be around much longer. So we need to document and photograph these, which he did. So I mentioned earlier, 1951 was a very important kind of period in all of this stuff coming together. I was only probably about 14 at that point, and I was really excited that my sister Carolyn was going to marry this architect, Holland Brady, which they did. And it was also the same year that Holland started work with Shannon Merriweather. And it was also the same year when my father brought us Flynn, purchased Country Club Heights. And then Holland and Ligon were now brothers-in-law, and they started collaborating on many projects that they did. So, in 1951, my parents purchased 6 lots from the estate of Ralph Erskine and Susan Rogers, known as Country Club Heights. And I still have the deed signed by Susan Rogers and Ralph Erskine and Carol Pickens Rogers who was my mentor in my middle days. He was the trustee at that time. So there were a lot of interesting connections. So they purchased 6 lots. 2 went to my dad, 2 went to the Holland Brady's, and 1 went to Tom and Mary Moore.
Who got married in 51 too?
Pardon?
They got married in 51 too.
Oh, another 51. Thank you. And 1 lot went to Jim and Priscilla Tapley. Priscilla was the brother of Tom Moore. So that's how they sort of ended up getting one of the lots, rather than Tom getting 2 lots. And interestingly, that lot, the Tapleys never built on it, but Joan Post bought it, and interestingly, I understand that was just closed up on the sale of that house just this month. So that's kind of how Country Club Heights got started with this development, which began in 1953, kind of 54 time frame. So the first house was my parents' house, and Ligon clearly had been working on the design for this thing in his head. And he was still like a junior at NC State at the time. So he needed some help. But he fortunately had a well-placed brother-in-law here in Tryon. And so he was able to call on his brother-in-law to help him out. And I cannot imagine what people must have thought if they wandered up the Country Club Heights in the early 50s and saw this. What on earth is going on? So this is the skeleton of the house that was being constructed. And my father was able to get his brother, Brady Flynn, to build this thing. So if you can imagine doing the structure necessary for this, it must have been quite a challenge. And I remember the day they had the supporting pole in the middle. There was a lot of apprehension in the crowd that day when that pole was removed. Was this thing really going to stay up? But this is what it ended up looking like. And this is where I lived for 2 years before going to Chapel Hill, Carolina. So this picture was around 1954, 55, early 56. This is how it looks when you drive up. This is how it looks when you get inside. So you can see the challenge from an architectural point of view. He wanted to take advantage of this view with high glass windows, but he didn't want a flat ceiling, which would just be a lot of dead air. So, calling upon things he had learned from Buckminster Fuller and others, it's a hexagonal living room. He just brought it down to a point 9 feet above the floor. So that when you came in, the entrance behind this concrete chimney here, and you went down 3 steps, so you're going down into the living room as the slope of the ceiling is going down. Now, many of you were fortunate enough to acquire art and painting by Guntram Gersh, because Guntram and his partner lived in this house when I took these pictures. So all the paintings on the wall were basically by Guntram. And when Guntram passed away, Mike McHugh set up in the living room here to sell paintings left over from his estate. So many of you may have been there if you bought some of Guntram's paintings at that time. But this will give you an idea of what it looked like when Guntram lived there. Again, you can see the natural woods, paintings, and then the outside. The deck was later enlarged and enhanced by others that had lived in it as the house evolved through the years. So at the same time, Holland was getting started with his house next door. It was Holland and Carolyn's first house. And we're fortunate to have Bob and Dottie George with us today, who acquired the house and have given it all the TLC you could think of to expand it into make it much more a living environment as time has gone by and as the times have required the house be upgraded and so forth. So this is the house just at the point when the part to the right was added. So Holland was still alive at the time, and they were able to have Holland extend the house with the bedroom and the same on the part of the house, so that it still looked more like it was part of the original house. But if you go to the other side, this is a view from the other side, looking towards the mountains. Here's an interior shot to show you the fireplace that he designed with a sort of dining area in the living room. And then behind where this picture was taken is this lovely seating area with a view of the mountains where you can sit and contemplate your thoughts for the day. And interestingly, as Holland pointed out, and as Bob knows, Holland oriented this absolutely due north over Tryon Peak. So if you want to know which way is north, just go into their living room and look there and you'll know which way is north. And recently they replaced and expanded a small deck that was on the side and made a nice screened-in porch to sit out and enjoy this view. Well done, Bob and Dottie. Just as a side note, for you who do not know, Bob and Dottie also are the creators for Tryon Cellars wine. So if you want to dip into a little wine, you can go into the bottle and find Tryon Cellars wine with Morris the horse on the front. So something you might want to put away in the back of your mind. So the next house was the house of my sister Mary and her husband Tom Moore. Now, the reason they didn't get started with Holland and my parents' house was Tom was away in Korea at the time. So by the time he got out and got back, it was now almost the mid-50s. And so it was time for them to build the house on their lot that they had on Country Club Heights. And this is what Ligon created. Now, when you look at the side of the house, the masonry work, and if those of you who came into the church, if you observed, it's very similar. And as a matter of fact, when you put the two together, you can clearly see it was done by the same mason. And so sometimes it helps to have family connections. So Tom was able to get the mason that did the work on the church, built same period, to come into the house in Country Club Heights. Again, when you think about the period, this is really kind of classic mid-century modern, flat roof, long overhangs. This is the front of the house. And I was up one day and I saw this reflection in the windows in the front, perfect reflection of the mountains. I ran home and got my camera and came back and was able to capture this because it shows you the view as well as what the structure looked like. When you go into the house, you go in on a landing and you immediately see the beautiful decorations that John Rutter and his partner have done to make this just an exquisite example of mid-century modern, not only architecture, but furnishings, lighting, everything. And you immediately see this beautiful lamp and chair, and then you walk down the steps that are put into the side wall to a landing with this, and then you continue on your journey down under, and this is where that you ended up above where the table and chair was. So you had a fireplace down underneath, and the thing to point out for those who have already observed it, the walls are not sheetrock. The walls are the masonry. And when this house was built, the walls were about 18 inches thick with air in the middle. So it provides its own sort of cooling, air conditioning in a sense. And so the outside, the inside, you still are able to enjoy and experience the stonework. And then when you look out, you see the view of the mountain. You can walk underneath bookshelves, and it still continues around underneath. So we come back to Holland. How are we doing for time? We better move along. So we're now going to pick up where Holland graduates and goes to work for Paul Schweiger in Chicago. Now, Paul Schweiger was really one of the top architects in Chicago at the time. He went on to be head of architecture at Yale and later Carnegie Mellon. So Paul Schweiger was a heavy hitter in the mid-century modern art movement and architecture. So Holland goes to work for Paul, and Paul says, okay, your first job is going to be to complete this house that myself and the person I designed it for is in your hometown. And you're going to finish the working drawings, and you're going to be the project manager on this. So this was Holland's first job. So this house had been designed for and by a gentleman by the name of Edward Bennett. Now the reason I'm telling you this is you're probably wondering why is this important? It's important to emphasize the importance of top architects deciding to come and live in Tryon and building a house here. This guy was together with a guy named Daniel Burnham. They developed what was known as the 1909 Plan of Chicago, and then they were tasked to implement it. He was chairman of the Board of Architects from 27 to 37, and he hired Paul Schweiger and worked with him to develop this house that he was going to retire to. And this is what they did. The sad news is this house was unfortunately destroyed a couple of years ago. It no longer exists. So we can only appreciate in pictures what was one of the most classic mid-century houses to be built in this area. It was even featured in Architectural magazine as a feature article, and the plans are actually have been put into the Art Institute in Chicago. But it's such a classic example of what you would find for an early 1950s mid-century modern house with large overhangs, glass walls. And one of the other features often mentioned about mid-century is long, open passageways, openness inside the structure. And this example here clearly illustrates this unencumbered view that you get throughout this house. It was just such a wonderful design. Beautiful fireplace, again, natural woods, mid-century furniture, even the kitchen. In the kitchen, whoever was cooking was always looking out on this fantastic view of the mountains. So I wanted to show this because it's something you'll never see, but it's an example of what a fellow by the name of George Smart, who has established the NC Modernist website in Raleigh. is trying to do everything he can to preserve mid-century modern architecture. And he does everything he can to help preserve structures like this from going under the bulldozer. And when I saw this representative of Morris, I just had to take a picture of this as I was leaving the house. So we need to get back to who was this Meriwether guy? And when did he come here? And how did this whole thing start with Meriwether and then a fellow with the name of Walcott? And what is so amazing, which I want to try to emphasize, is that here we have an architectural firm that was either one or two people, and they've now been going for almost 80 years in this little town of Tryon. How could you support an architectural firm like that for so long? And we're going to explore a little bit more about the importance of that. Well, Meriwether came here, and apparently his first house was a house design called Warrior Hall, also known as Brook Hill Farm. And you've probably never seen it unless you knew to go there. It's a road called Lakota off of Warrior Drive, and you go up, and it's stuck back up against the mountains. But Walcott Meriwether apparently designed this for his sister-in-law in 1934. But because of that, he ended up actually moving here in 36 when he started and opened up his Shannon Meriwether Architectural Office. So that's how this firm kind of got started. And then Holland comes along in 51, and he's hired by Shannon Meriwether to join his practice. And then in 54, Holland was made a full partner. And who was Russell Walcott? Well, as one article said, he was a superbly trained and talented architect working in Chicago in the first half of the 20th century. He was so prominent that the acclaimed designer Buckminster Fuller in 1928 referred to Walcott as, quote, the best residential designer in Chicago. So why do I point this out? Once again, to illustrate to you the level and caliber of architects moving to Tryon and building and designing houses here. They were not done by guys just out of school trying to build their first house, but these were seasoned, well-established architects. Walcott moved here in 36, and within a couple of years he had met Meriwether, and he and Meriwether started designing houses together. And Walcott died in 59 and is actually buried in the Memorial Gardens in Columbus. This house I wanted to show, and this is thanks to Gary Korn, who provided me with these photographs, because this house was just sold earlier this month. But to me, it's a classic example of really almost, you can see prairie style in the house. You know, long lines, low roof, glass walls. And this is such a great example of Meriwether and Brady working together, because this was done in 64, which meant Holland and Meriwether were working on it a year or two before that, doing the design. This is on Carolina Drive, just above the waterworks. But it's such a great example, and right in your backyard here in Tryon. And then, of course, we come to this incredible Presbyterian church that Holland and Meriwether designed. It was finished also in 56. And Dean covered a lot of this in his talk, so I'm not going to go into detail because all of that is on the last part of his lecture that he did here. But just to show you, I don't have to show you this because you're in it. I think this is probably one of Holland Meriwether's really best things that they did in the area. Now, interestingly, this is also a Holland Brady house, and this was built in Rutherfordton. And I have to thank Chris Bartol, who provided me the photographs for this. But this was, I think, around the mid-50s, 58, something like that. Holland did this house. I mean, how modern can you get? You know, all the glass, flat roof. Even the inside, the natural woods, everything. Nice open interior. So this was an early Holland creation. So I'm trying to show you these pictures in somewhat chronological sequence so you can see how he evolved as well as he was growing more experienced in designing houses in the area. And his next big project was the Methodist Church in Columbus, which he also won an award for. So this was done, I believe, in the late 50s, early 60s, or the 60s. And this is the interior. And here's a house probably a few of you have seen. This was known as the Murray House. And this is in Polk County. And I just happened to be here one weekend. And Holland took me to see this, and I was able to make these photographs because it's such a great example to show you how Holland was progressing with the kind of designs he was doing. You go around to the other side, you see the big glass windows, the decks. Just a beautiful, beautiful mountain home. A lot of natural woods. Again, masonry, natural masonry inside. And here's a house that was done a couple of years later. This was done in Columbus. In this house, when you drive up to it, this is the front of the house. But when you go around to the back, it's a totally different view. So you can see, once again, the long, low, not flat, but very minimal slope in the roof, long lines, glass windows and doors. One of the things I've discovered going through all of this is how heavily influenced a lot of the architecture in Tryon and the area has been by Chicago Midwest architects. Very few of them I have found that have come from New England, which means Harvard, Yale, sort of architectural schools. But so much of the influence that I've seen is all from Midwest architects.
Holland said that you catch a train in Chicago and not get off a car to get into Tryon.
Oh, there you go.
There was a real connection between Chicago and Tryon.
So just some interior shots of the house. Now, this house was done in 2010 and is the house of Tammy and Bill Coleman, who are here today. Thank you for letting me show this house. There's something about the view. If you look closely, you can see Hogback and Rocky Spur. So it kind of tells you where it's oriented around Columbus with that view. This is the approach when you drive up to it. And then you go inside, and it's wonderful interior with a view looking down over that great mountain view. A beautiful stairway with wires so you don't block the view of the steps itself, but leaves it open. And once again, you see the beautiful lounge chairs together with art in a wonderful sort of mid-century environment. So we turned now to Ligon, coming back to him. So we went from Holland, where he really started his career in Tryon. Now at the same time, Ligon had gone off and was living in Wilmington, North Carolina, starting his architectural career. And it's amazing to me, may not be to some folks, particularly his son in Carolina and others, how many awards Ligon won. But he won AIA awards for the Garden Gallery he did in Raleigh in '69, the Visitor Reception Center at Brook Green Gardens, condominiums at Litchfield Plantation, Pawleys Island, the Yacht Club at Figure 8, plus another 70 plus houses he designed at Figure 8 Island off of Wilmington. And then in '81, he and his brother-in-law teamed up, Holland and Ligon, won a joint award for the Brevard student housing up at the Brevard Music Camp. So they won a joint award together. In 1986, Ligon was made a fellow of the AIA, keeping in mind that only about 3% make it as an AIA fellow. So it's a fairly important distinction and award he received. And then he won another award for his office in Wilmington, North Carolina. This is the visitor center at Brook Green Gardens that he won the award for. And here are a couple of pictures of the music camp at Brevard that he and Holland together won an AIA award for. So in 1993, Ligon was the proud recipient of the Camp Hefner Prize. Camp Hefner decided he wanted to have a substantial award for top architects in the state, but they had to have been working for at least 10 years and had proven themselves. So there was a whole list of things to even qualify for this. And so, as you see here, Ligon was only the fifth person to get this award, and $10,000 in 1993. That was a lot of money back then. And that's when he bought his Ligon camera and built his photographic studio. This is an example of his office in Wilmington, where he won, again, an AIA award for. He worked on other important projects in Wilmington, the Hughes Art Gallery for St. John's Museum. Thalian Hall, he worked with another art firm from Virginia to do renovations and expansions. He built the Yacht Club on Figure 8 Island, as I mentioned, 70 plus other houses on Figure 8. And he also was commissioned to do the Student Union Annex at NC State. So he was a busy architectural career he had going. His papers from 54 to 2010 are now in the archival collections at NC State University libraries. And it consists of his architectural drawings, extensive project files, and related architectural records. So his papers and works have been preserved there in Raleigh. We're now going to come to one other Ligon Flynn house, and that was done for my sister Mary and brother-in-law Tom Moore. And this was done in the sort of 78, 79 time frame. So this is another Tryon house, and this is what it looks like when you drive up to it. And when you go around to the other side, this is the view you get. On the left is the main house with the living room, kitchen, main bedrooms, connected by a 40-foot breezeway that connects on the other side to the guest house. So guests, and my wife and I were fortunate enough to be guests there many years. We could stay in the guest house, go for a swim, come and go, and you never had to bother anybody in the main house. So it was beautifully designed for this. And inside, again, you see the rock work. What you're looking at here, you're only seeing one side. This was a 9-foot square masonry structure that had fireplaces on 3 of the 4 sides. And it was totally open so that you could walk around, and you'd have a seating area and then a dining area, and each one had their own fireplace. You can see here how you can move around to the left. And here's the dining area, and a painting by Ligon on the wall with a fireplace just to the left of that. And this is a shot down this is what I call the breezeway. On the right is a fireplace. On the left are doors that open up, take you out to the swimming pool. So this was taken from the guest house side. And I'll finish up with Ligon. This was an article that appeared in the Wrightsville Beach magazine about Ligon Point. And this was basically his last major work. It's about 14,000 square foot house. And it was named Ligon Point after him. So that kind of helps close out a really amazing history of architecture for Ligon.
Where is that?
Pardon?
Where is that?
It's on Figure 8 Island.
Okay.
Yeah, another one. So we'll turn to this gentleman who you recognize immediately as Holland. And I'm going to show you one other house. And this was a house he designed in 1969 here in Tryon. And my wife Frances and I are so pleased that we were able to move into this house past August. So this is our new home in the town of Tryon. But being a 50-plus-year-old house, it needed some updating. So we had to do some updates to the deck, for example, which originally only went down underneath the overhang of the house. So thanks for the help of Julia McIntyre, who's here. She helped us conceive of. She said, "You really ought to make this deck bigger so you can use it." And we agreed completely. And we also wanted to add a little studio to the back of the carport. So Julia came up with plans, and you can see now the deck. And in the back of that is the studio we added off of the back of the carport. And when you go inside, you can see, looking across the dining table, to the view out onto the deck. And in the back, rather than put books on the bookshelf, we filled it with pottery that we've collected over the years. And then on the left-hand wall are all those paintings that I had mentioned earlier. So this is our new home here in Tryon. So I'm going to start to close by really telling you about, for those of you who want to explore in more detail, you can go to ncmodernist.org through Google, and this will take you to this website. And this had been developed by George Smart, who was so disturbed about modernist houses that were getting bulldozed, particularly in the Triangle area, that he set up this website to try to document and preserve and help people find buyers for modernist houses. So if you go to this website, you'll have a drop-down box with a menu, and one of the things you can do is go and do a search. And if you type in Holland Brady, for example, or you could type in Ligon Flynn, then up will come a page like this, and then that will follow with many of the houses that you've seen today, plus many, many others. So in sort of beginning to summarize, I want to just try to say how amazing I find Tryon to be in that it can produce two young boys who grew up very parallel, even though 6 to 8 years apart. But they grew up in Tryon schools, became Boy Scouts, and started their career from here. And Tryon has supported an architectural firm that started in '36 with Meriwether Walcott, and they've developed over 1,000 buildings and remodelings during that time. But what's just as important is that over that time, 40 other architects, 40 plus, have made their mark on Tryon, including Dean Tragus, Julie McIntyre, and John Walters, who are currently all still practicing here in Tryon. So this, to me, I find this to be an absolutely amazing story. So for a town the size of Tryon, it's remarkable. And I doubt if you could find any other town this size that could tell this story. And I'd like to end with a question. for everyone in the audience who lives in or has lived in a house designed by one of the architects we've talked about today to stand up.
Wow.
Well, so with that, case closed. And thank you for coming in. I hope you enjoyed it.
Very eloquently, I tried to explain in my introduction about Tryon and its influence in the broader world. Nothing could have said it better. I want to say one more thing. Shields mentioned another website in passing. I'm not sure he gave the address. Mike McHugh did not pay me to say this. His website is tryonhistory.org. I think I'm correct. My computer knows that if I don't, but I got it too. A lot of Tryon history in this website is beautifully done. You're missing something if you don't look into that. Thank you again, Shields. Very good.